Parantez, ARPA ինստիտուտի կողմէ բարիկալուս բոլորիդ եւ շնորհակալություն, որ կմասնակցիք մեր քննարկմանը։ Այս քննարկումը պիտի ունենք անգլերենով, մասնակիցները որտեղ անգլերեն ավելի լավ կարտահայտվին. So we're going to talk about today the challenges facing Armenia. And as you can see, the moderator will be Dr. Hriar Cabayan, and he will be coordinating the panel discussion, and he will introduce all the panelists. But before we go to the discussion, I'd like to say a few words about ARPA Institute and its activities in Armenia. As many of you know, we have been working in Armenia for the last 36 years, trying to advance science, technology, healthcare, education, and so on. And all our members are experts in various fields, and we try to help the institutes, the universities, and also work with the government so that we can achieve as much as possible. And so if you like what ARPA Institute is doing, please donate so we can do more in Armenia. We have several ongoing projects right now. One of them, two of them actually, are in the Azerbaijan National Lab, and then one in the Polytechnic University, and also with the Yerevan State University. So in the Azerbaijan National Lab, we have started two new programs. One of them is an experimental research, and it is related to solar cells, silicon solar cells, and with a new approach, which is being directed by Professor Akopyan in UC Irvine. We are going to, the research shows actually that the efficiency of the solar cells can increase up to 50%, which is more than doubling it compared to the current market efficiencies. So this could be very important for Armenia, especially if we can manufacture it in Armenia. And it will be competitive with petroleum. And also there's the research part of it, which is being done in the Yerevan State University. And the research also proves the experimental results. And so they are both very promising. We also have in the Azerbaijan National Lab a detection lab where they are trying to develop new detectors. And we're trying to help this group. Also, we have another project which is called photomultiplier tube, radio frequency photomultiplier tube, which is essentially a single photon detector, which is very important in many, many areas, in medical fields, in high technology areas, for microscopes and so on. And we are helping that also to be developed. We're actually trying to build now a prototype. And also we are starting a new center of excellence for circuit design in the Polytechnic University, which will essentially provide a new course or probably courses related to an internationally known software for circuit design, which is the Cadence software. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel director, Dr. Cabayan. He's a visiting scientist at the Lawrence Livermore Lab, and also he works at the Pentagon in the Joint Chief of Staff and as a researcher. So, Hriar, the floor is yours.
Well, Hagop, thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the briefers, of course. and all the participants. I see we have a good number of participants who are going to be participating. It's going to be recorded, so you may be able to send it to your friends. Before I start into the program, I would like to give yield the floor to Dr. Yervan Zoryan. He was instrumental in getting the first phase of this a year ago going on the Armenian Virtual College platform. So, Yervan, over to you if you want to make some introductory remarks. It'd be appreciated.
Please, sure, I can do that. Thank you. So last year we were able to start this process again with close collaboration with Hriar Cabayan. In this case, he did introduce us to the concept of scenario-based planning. And after the war, we felt that strategic planning based on scenarios was essential. That's why we intended to create a course via ABC, via the HBU Armenian Virtual College, which teaches strategic planning via scenarios. And we did the phase one, as Hriar just mentioned, of the panel discussion like this, which got recorded. But the theory side of it is also part of the same course. So there's a theory part taught by Alison Courtois, and then the practice part, the panel that we had last year, 2-day panel, and that all is offered by AVC on a quarterly basis. We had several cohorts already. Currently, we have a cohort from the government. Multiple ministries and the prime ministry employees are taking the course at this point as one of the cohorts. This is just to let you know that this course continues to be offered on a quarterly basis. And the scenarios that are being looked at are similar to the ones that you will see here today. So this new one will be essential to be added. So it will be augmented to the course as well, in addition to the white paper that Dr. Cabayan will talk about as well. Okay, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Yervan. I also want to recognize Arpine Tavakalyan. Arpine is participating today. She was instrumental getting everything going for us last year and throughout the year. As I always say, and I'm sure she's bored hearing me say that, she walks on water. So Arpine, I'm so happy you're participating and look forward to collaborating with you more. Okay, so let's go with our program. Let me be upfront with you. I am not going to take your time introducing our phenomenal participants today. That will take too much time. We have a big program. You can see their bios in the booklet that Hagop has forwarded, extensive bios and all their articles. So I hope you don't mind. I'm not gonna do that. But again, I wanna still thank all the participants. I think I'm watching here. I think we got almost 40 people participating. So that's very good. It's going to get recorded, so you can take it, send it to your friends who were not able to participate. Now, very briefly, I would like to mention that the follow-on to this, these are talks on geopolitical challenges and opportunities Armenia is facing. The next one in May, I want to mention that Dr. Naira Sakyan from AUA has put together the report already. It's the title is Geopolitical Assessment of Presidents Erdogan and Aliyev. So that's going to happen in May. So stay tuned. The ARPA Institute will be scheduling that talk in May. All right. So again, I want to thank all of our panelists and all the participants. So the way we're going to do this, like I said, I'm not going to read the bios. It's going to take too much time. Each participant will have 10 minutes, and I'm going to open it up to each participant with specific questions based on the articles they presented. And I'm going to go in the alphabetical order. So I'm going to, if that's okay, I'm going to get going here. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. David Akopyan. And David, so let me pose the questions to you that came up very distinctly in the article you presented. So I extracted, so it's subjective. I did the extraction. 3 themes that I thought were very important for people to focus on. So here they are, under the leadership of President Erdogan, and you're going to, oh, by the way, Tabit is going to be assessing Armenia-Turkey relationship, so Turkey's role in all this. So under the leadership of President Erdogan, the country has shifted its focus towards a more assertive role on its immediate neighborhood and harbors ambitions for regional dominance. Point one. Point two, there are potential fault lines in Turkey's relations with Azerbaijan. That's point two. And the third point you made that I extracted from your article, which I thought was very relevant, Armenia's diplomacy with respect to Türkiye must be creative and think outside the box. David, over to you, 10 minutes to address these three issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hriar. Good morning to you and good evening to the colleagues on this side of the globe. We'll try to be brief. The time is limited, so 10 minutes. We'll try to respect the limits given. First, I cannot say that I'm a political analyst and dealt with the Turkey, but I was more a professional. I spent 20-something years with the United Nations and worked in the countries from Central Asian states, Afghanistan, up to Middle East and East and North Africa. So, and Turkey here and there, I always had some interactions. So, it had always very special interest how the Turks are thinking, what they are aiming for, and where they want to go. So, a couple of words maybe about this summary on my perception or my assessment what the Turkey is, and then we'll go specific to your questions. I think first it is, we all know, Turkey has this glorious times in the 16th century. It was probably the superpower of the world, and it has, similar to Russia, but Russia has much more recently this experience of being the superpower. They still have these nostalgic feelings about dominating the world. And also they have the special responsibility being the religious, Sultan of Ottoman Empire was the leader of the Sunni Islam at least. But at the same time, Turkey is the first democratic Islamic republic with Kemal Atatürk completely changing the Turkey and building the new statehood out of the Ottoman Empire. So, and then geographic location of Turkey being, they said, the bridge between the Europe and Asia, and also closely connected to Africa also. And when I was in Somalia, in fact, Erdogan was the only head of the state who visited 2 times in 4 years Somalia. And he visited almost all African countries also. And this is, I'm coming to this point that Erdogan, and especially with Erdogan, it became new type of expansionist Turkish approach to the neighbors. I mean, first it was very peaceful, and probably I can divide the Erdogan rule of 21 years by 2 decades. First decade, he was showing his interest in the region, in the neighborhood, but it was more to about zero problem with all the neighbors. So, including our soccer diplomacy, including many other efforts with most of the neighbors in the region. And interesting enough, at the same time, Turkey first beginning of the millennium, my former boss, UNDP Administrator Kemal Dervish, who was before the Minister of Finance, designed economic reforms, which led to economic accelerated growth of the first decade in the 21st century. Then we got another Erdogan after he got elected probably as a president, who became much more aggressive in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, and supporting Azerbaijan also, and trying to impose his dominance in the region. Today, there was a very interesting article in Economist about Indian Prime Minister Modi, and they were asking whether Modi is Erdogan or Modi is Lee Kuan Yew, the Singapore's Prime Minister. And the point was there that whether this, whether they can temper, whether Modi can temper his authoritarian instincts within some limits, assuming that Erdogan has this problem limiting his authoritarian instinct and trying to dominate. My own assessment, Erdogan is very aggressive and trying to dominate where possible. but at the same time, he's also trying to, he understands his limits and he can go up to some limit. The way it happened with Russia in 2015 and now also. I mean, despite all the sort of ups and downs, I understood the latest he's going on May 9 to Washington to have an official meeting with Biden. I think first in many years. I mean, with Trump, he had few meetings. And so he's accepting the Western alliance. He's mostly part of, but he's trying to play his role also with the rest of the world. So when we speak about Turkey and the region, I think it is important to factor many, I mean, implications for Armenia. So Turkey and Russia. And we have been sandwiched in between Turkey and Russia for at least 200 or more years. And this is again the time where we need to make some difficult decisions. Turkey and Middle East. When I was in Syria and I witnessed firsthand, I mean, how aggressive Turkey could be and how much let's say, they took some parts of control over the Syrian territories, then after Iraq, etc. So Turkey and Middle East, former colonies of Ottoman Empire, they still consider they can have a say there. So this is, but also Turkey is a part of NATO and probably the spoiled child of NATO. I mean, Turkey feels, I mean, I guess this is the only Islamic country in, or maybe I'm wrong, sorry. So Turkey
Albania.
is, Albania also, yes, thank you. So, although Albania is not 100%, it's 80 to 20, I think, but whatever. So, but at the same time, I think, so Turkey is allowed to be much more different than most of the other alliance members, but then there are still some limits, and then Turkey, so far, I think they are respecting. When I was reflecting on our discussion a year and a few months ago, the first discussion, and I was also speaking then about Turkey, I think one of the things which I made the point that Turkey gravitates toward Russia, toward Iran, Azerbaijan, all these autocratic neighbors of Armenia. But then, to me, this gravitation has certain limits, and Turkish democratic, the basics of the states, it has some foundations, and it will not turn into totally authoritarian regime. And the last recent few weeks ago election, the local election showed also that the democracy has deep roots in Turkey within some limits also. And Turkey still, to me, with all these like back and forth playing and flirting with Russia and the rest of the authoritarian regimes, I think it more belongs to the Western alliance and NATO alliance. Now coming to Azerbaijan and Turkey, to one nation, two states, the way they have declared it on many occasions. I think, but there are still definitely many dividing lines, and I call them fault lines. Naturally, Sunni versus Shia, and Shia gravitate to Iran. Of course, Azerbaijan is not deeply religious, but still there is an element of this. Azeri military is constructed from two parts. The Russian trained, Russian sort of systems organization, and Turkey, NATO, whatever. So, and there is a natural, to me, conflict between these two type of construct of the army. And we need to think, I mean, whether they will come into conflict or not, but there are issues which we can try to explore. I think also Russian dominance is much more corrupting dominance, and the traditions coming from Russia are much more corrupt than the traditions coming from Turkey, and especially. And then naturally, I mean, the last, of course, Israel-related issues. Turkey took a very strong stand against Israel and pro-Hamas, pro-Gaza, and also pro-Hamas. I mean, Erdogan received recently, last couple of days ago, Hamas leadership also in Ankara. So while Azerbaijan is quite careful, silent, and tries still maintaining good relations with Israel, and on Gaza, the statements are very sort of, I mean, they didn't make any strong statement. And overall, of course, this democracy versus autocracy. So with all the sort of limitations of Turkish democracy, it still has has a foundation there, which Azerbaijan is more type of Central Asian family autocracy or totalitarian regime, where probably outside the family it's very hard to imagine how the power will be transferred, while Turkey is totally different. I remember myself when I was in Central Asia some 20 years ago, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, the first wave of Turkish investment, businesses, etc. When they came, they were quite welcome. But after a few years, I mean, there was some resistance against the Turkey. They are different, culturally different, and then it was not that obvious that to be great to run has sort of attraction on all sides of the Turkish wall. Now let's come back, probably a couple of words about Armenian-Turkey relations, and then I mentioned the part related to Armenia trying to play smart with Turkey, Turkey versus Russia, Turkey versus Azerbaijan, but also, let's say, we definitely need to partition our discussions with Turkey and our discussions with Azerbaijan, and not make the best possible not to mix the two lines of discussion into one. Second, to me, Turkey is EU candidate. Of course, it is already 25 years the candidate, probably the longest in the queue waiting. But at the same time, I don't know how much and how quickly the Georgia will move with EU accession process. But if Georgia faces some problem, at least I think Turkey offers possibly another opportunity for Armenia as a transport connection to Europe, but also as a political, probably some connection, which we need. Of course, I understand the challenges there, but at least we need to try to explore it a bit deeper and more. Trade and complementarity of our economies. So of course, our trade relations are very minimal. And I know the sentiment in Armenia, that in Turkey, there have been many times, they don't have that much deep sentiments about Armenian goods. And there are very limited number of Armenian goods. But complementarity and our view is diversification of our economic relations, which is more about shifting our export to Russia, to all countries, including Europe, Middle East, and possibly also to Turkey, is part of our effort also. And eventually, if we can build economic win-wins, it will be something to help us and to help them also. But of course, this all need to be done with major precaution about, let's say, the complicated history we have with them, and we have to do it very carefully and factoring also the discussions we have with Azerbaijan and ongoing, let's say, process, which is very challenging. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Well, Tavi, thank you very much. Very much appreciated. I see we have about 45 people participating so far. That's a great number. It's going to be recorded. Please, to all the participants, please post your questions that you have, and we're going to get to as many of them at the end. So please start posting your question. So the next speaker is Anna Gevorgyan. You probably remember Anna. She participated last year, but last year she was representing Iran. So, but today she's looking at Iran-Armenia complex Iran-Armenia relationship. And Anna, I have, based on your article, again, I encourage you guys, all the participants, to go back and read those wonderful reports our wonderful participants have provided. So I have the following questions for you, Anna, based on your article. The balancing approach towards regional countries remains the main feature of Iran's policy in the South Caucasus. So that's one point you make. The second point you make, there's a complex interplay of regional dynamics and Iran's red lines and positions in the so-called corridor issue, which is a very important issue. That's the second point you make that I extracted from your article. And the third point you make, which I thought was very interesting, worth talking about, Iranian officials declared their unequivocal support of Armenia's territorial integrity and full support of the crossroad of peace announced by the Prime Minister of Armenia. Anna, over to you to address these issues. You have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity, both in participating in writing the white paper and also in this very important discussion. So I wanted to mention two things to show that talking about Iran's policy in our region is very important, not only from the point of view of security issues of our country, but also taking into account that last surveys taken by International Republican Institute shows that for Armenian public also, Iran is one of the three countries of the most important security and also political partner. So taking this into account, we internally in Armenia now have discussions and discourses on Armenia-Iran relations that frequently are anchored on very extremist ideas. From the one point, talking that Armenia-EU and Armenia-the West relations are against Armenia-Iran relations, and vice versa, that Iran collaborates with the West to help Armenia. And so in my paper, I try to explore the multifaceted landscape of Iran's regional policy amidst the backdrop of global turbulence, and try to refer to the complexities of Iran's strategic calculations, focusing on its relationship not only with the countries in the region, but also beyond. And we live in a situation and in times when every day important features and developments happen, and Iran's attack on Israel, and after that also Israel's claims that Israel also had its response, whereafter we had already written our white papers, but these developments also, of course, have its influence, and I will refer to those, how these developments can weaken Iran's position in the region. But in the report, I stress the importance not to forget Iran-Russia relations when talking about Iran's policy in the region. And because this relationship is in the heart of Iran's regional strategy, and because Russia is a key player in shaping geopolitical dynamics, Iran has strategically aligned itself with Moscow even after Ukrainian war started, perceiving an opportunity to capitalize on what it views as an emerging international order. Despite officially denying direct military support, evidence suggests a significant level of cooperation between Iran and Russia, including the inspection of drones and missile defense systems. With all this military support, however, Iran is not openly supporting Russia, as it will be the country that was a subject of aggression itself during Iran-Iraq war, and now supporting another aggressor. Another obstacle to the open support of Russia is Iran's security concerns concerning some neighbors' territorial demands towards Iran, and especially you know about Azerbaijan's strategies towards some territories of Iran. Taking into consideration the ethnic minorities living in the areas that are subject to those demands, it will be a risky step for Iran to press Russian policies towards its neighbor and annexation of its territories. The cooperation of the countries, though, is reflected in the economic indicators. By January 2023 already, Russia had become the largest foreign investor in Iran, and it put its $2.7 billion into Iranian manufacturing, mining, and transport sectors. It's important to mention that also the issue of Russia-Iran relations is at the center of the attention of Western analysts, especially in the conditions of the current global confrontation. The factor of Azerbaijan in an intermediate link in these relations seems to be often ignored. Interestingly, these part of their relations are sometimes also ignored when looking from Yerevan also, forgetting about this very important economic cooperation between Azerbaijan, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia. And Azerbaijan, for its part, uses its anti-Iranian and sometimes anti-Russian rhetoric to present itself as a part of the collective West. Also, we, of course, see some tensions between the West and Azerbaijan, this PASA issue and discussions about sanctions and other stuff. But whenever it comes to the issues of Ukrainian war or Israel's politics and also war in Gaza, Azerbaijan tries to present itself as a part of this collective West. At the same time, however, Azerbaijan is deepening its economic cooperation with Iran and Russia, and these countries consider Azerbaijan as an important partner in the energy sector with the increasing role of a bridge between them. And also not only in energy sector, but also in the field of infrastructure and important connectivity links. Several days ago, for example, when Aliyev was in Moscow, one of the top topics was, of course, this infrastructure issue. And in this regard, Iran's attitude also is very important. When it comes to Iran's role in supporting Armenia's security issues and also Iran's red lines towards Armenia's territorial integrity, it's important to mention that the main topic which is also considered an important red line for Iran is the so-called corridor issue, Zangezur corridor that Azerbaijan and Turkish side demand from Armenia. Iran's commitment to Armenia's territorial integrity and its cooperation with France, Armenia-France cooperation, and also Iran's stance that official Tehran not only isn't against of this cooperation, but sometimes they also have some areas of cooperation themselves when it comes to Armenia's security. This shows Iran's proactive regional policy and Tehran's desire to be more active in the region. And I want also to highlight several factors why this corridor issue is very important for Iran to oppose. And first of all, this is not only Armenia's territorial integrity, but the concept of territorial integrity itself. Iran, like many nations, prioritizes the principle of territorial integrity and establishment of the Zangezur corridor, which will connect Azerbaijan with its exclave Nakhichevan via extraterritoriality, raises concerns about potential territorial concessions and border changes. Geopolitical dynamics also can be influenced, of course, and security concerns in other factor. Iran is very worried of the security implications associated with the corridor because it will introduce a potential to have extra regional presence, this time not only in Azerbaijan proper, and for Iran it's especially worrying Israel's presence, but also Israel's possible presence also on the corridor, just on the border with Iran. regional stability is another factor why this issue is a red line for Iran. And also, we must not forget also about economic influence. Iran serves as an important economic partner for Azerbaijan, as I said. And having this economic leverage is very important, taking into account that nowadays Azerbaijan connects with its exclave via Iran. And so this gives also important tools to Iran to have economic and political leverage on Azerbaijan. For example, if we consider the discussions of possible military attack of Israel on Iran, the discussions taking place nowadays, both in Iran and beyond the country. Several scenarios are considered, and one of them is the possible involvement of Azerbaijan in that case. And for Iran, it's important to have this political and economic leverage on Azerbaijan in order to not to happen this kind of scenario. So and also here it's important to mention that Azerbaijan also manipulates this issue too whenever they are discussing the issue of corridor with Western partners. They are threatening that if Armenia will not give the extraterritorial corridors, that they will create a corridor via Iran. But the manipulation here lies on the different legal statuses of the transit routes going via Iran and the route Azerbaijan demands from Armenia. And also one more factor, political mobilization is also a factor that influences on Iran's stance against the Zangezur corridor. The Azerbaijani minority in Iran has sometimes have and is expressing sentiments of solidarity with their ethnic kin in Azerbaijan. Of course, we can discuss how much this is influencing overall the politics of Iran, but internally they are creating some demands also from the official Tehran, and so the perception of territorial gains for Azerbaijan through the corridor could lead to political mobilization also and possible advocacy among the population, potentially exacerbating tensions with Iran. Another important factor in this issue is also, of course, strategic positioning, because growing strategic position of Azerbaijan in the region will increase even more by having this extraterritorial corridor. And so that's why for Iran, it's also perceived as a threat. And so just to conclude, Iran's regional policy reflects a delicate balancing act amidst the complexities of global geopolitics. And by strategically aligning with Russia, and engaging in the South Caucasus, Iran seeks to assert its influence and safeguard its strategic interests. And whenever they speak about their own red lines, sometimes in several cases, as I mentioned, especially in the case of the corridor issue, their red lines coincide with Armenia's red lines, and that's where Armenia and Iran are cooperating and must cooperate further. Thanks for your attention, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Well, Anna, thank you very much appreciated. I would request that if you're not talking, please mute yourself, just in case, you know, and then we have good number of participants. I encourage you to keep posting your questions. Tavit, you already have 2 questions posted for you here. If you could look at them and be ready at the end to address them. And Anna, I see 1 question already posted for you here. So I'm gonna keep track of those. So now our next participant is Nzhdeh Hovsepyan. Again, they're all coming in alphabetically, okay? So Nzhdeh, I'm sorry. Nzhdeh could not participate today. He had to travel. So he recorded his answers to the questions, and Hagop is going to show you the recording. But here are the questions I asked Nzhdeh to address based on the article he provided. Again, I'm repeating myself. Please read those articles. Our participants spent a fair amount of time. We went back and forth, back and forth. They did a great editing job. So I encourage you to read them. They're 5-6 pages long. It shouldn't be too hard for you. Most of you are great readers. I know that. So here are the questions I asked Nzhdeh to address. And his angle was Azerbaijan. So with most of its objectives achieved, Azerbaijan has the luxury of patience and can afford to wait for the right moment to sign a peace agreement when it sees maximum advantage to itself. So that's the first point Nzhdeh made in his article. Second point, it can bide its time and only commit to a peace deal when it's most advantageous to itself. And the third point he made, it is demonstrating aspirations of becoming a regional hegemon, and it's actively pursuing a unique form of 21st century vassal suzerain relations in the Caucasus. All right, with that said, Hagop, over to you to play the recording that Nzhdeh made addressing these 3 issues. We're gonna move on then, and we'll come back to this. Okay, thank you, Hagop. We'll come back to it. Again, if we don't get to it, please read his article. He does a great job addressing those issues. So Alexander, you're next, and I'm gonna read the questions I posed to you. You looked at the Russia, Russia angle. So here are the 2 questions I extracted from your article. Russia is arguably the most potent of all external players in the South Caucasus, full stop. Yet it is also the only one whose presence and influence is decreasing. That's the first thing I extracted. The second one, it no longer has much to offer in the realm of security in the region, and it is hard to imagine the restoration of such hegemony. All right, that's the 2 points. So, Alexander, over to you to address those questions.
Thank you, Hriar. I will try to expand it, and I will try to do it short. First, actually, yes, Russia is our, I would say, biggest neighbor. Biggest, not direct neighbor. We have Georgia between us, but it's a really huge neighbor by, I would say, all standards. It's a nuclear power, military, human, economic, financial resources. All this is incomparable to Armenia's modest ones. Russia is bigger than Armenia by territory 600 times. Russia's population of Russia is also large, about 50 times that of Armenia. Russia is former metropole. It was metropole in Russian Empire, Tsarist Empire, and then it was a metropole in time of USSR. Armenia was part of this empire. I think.
Excuse me, Art Gurdikyan. I appreciate if you can mute yourself, please. Sorry. Go ahead, Alexander.
I think that USSR was one of the forms of Russian Empire, continuation, very special form, but form of Russian Empire. So Armenia was 200 years, about 200 years, a bit less, a member of this country. So Russia is only great power, global power, which is close to us. Generally speaking, the structure of South Caucasus is like that. It's three countries, one triangle inside another triangle. The recognized states of, or widely recognized states of South Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and they are surrounded by three former empires, Russian Federation, Turkey, and Iran. And all this, in some time of its history, whole South Caucasus or part of South Caucasus was part of this or that empire. And the last one was Russian Federation. So Russia is and will be extremely important for our region. Even if tomorrow, theoretically, it's possible. Even if someday Russian elite, they will decide to have not to impact on South Caucasus or not to be part of decision making or I don't know, in South Caucasus region, Armenia included, even if they will decide to have such kind of policy, it's impossible. They will be part of the region. Geographically, for example, you cannot change Upper Lars by something. You cannot change a lot of things in this region. So Armenia still is a member of Russian-led bodies of the realm of politics. I mean, Commonwealth of Independent States, economics, Eurasian Economic Union, and security, Collective Security Treaty Organization. Sometimes it is formal. For example, I can say it now about the Collective Security Treaty Organization, but even formally, it's important. Armenia is part of that organizations. But I would say that Russia is very important, but you have less and less Russia in South Caucasus in general and in Armenia in particular. You have last 30 years or 20 years, you have more Europe here, you have more Iran here, you have more Turkey here. All their impacts on the South Caucasus are growing. In Russia, it's vice versa. By the way, I would say quotation that doesn't mean something necessarily good or bad. For example, as for me, I don't know which Russia is more dangerous for the South Caucasus, strong Russia or weak Russia. I don't know. Sometimes you see the reactions of weak Russia, and it could be dangerous for some countries around Russia, what they call near abroad or post-Soviet space. Second, the main instrument of Russians' impact, of Russians' pressure, if you would like, on Armenia and Azerbaijan was Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh was very instrumental for Russia, very instrumental both to stay in Armenia and Azerbaijan because of security. Because both Armenians and Azerbaijanis, they needed security from Russia. I mean, weapon, political forms of security, and other types of security. It was extremely important. Generally speaking, Russian way to impact on countries around Russia in post-Soviet space. You have just two prices on gas and security. In case of Azerbaijan, they don't need to, doesn't need now their gas. They have their gas and oil. As for Armenia, yes, these two things worked, and Armenia was needed. Russia, and the image of Russia was an image of provider of security for Armenia in this conflict with Azerbaijan. I wouldn't say that it was reality, but you had such kind of myth. Now we're, by the way, moving from one myth to another myth. From Russia will come and provide security as to the West will come and provide security for us. So now Nagorno-Karabakh doesn't exist. I even don't mean Nagorno-Karabakh, saying Nagorno-Karabakh, I even don't mean Nagorno-Karabakh as a just territory populated by ethnic Armenians. I need Nagorno-Karabakh, I mean Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, the subject, Artsakh. Because if you want to peacekeep something, you need to have this something. You need to have this subject, and Kiev was an instrument for Russians to be here in the region. Already, Nagorno-Karabakh does not exist. Its republic doesn't exist formally. It never was recognized by any country, and it doesn't exist as a de facto state. State is not exist on that territory. So situation is changing. Russia already don't have its main instrument to have a monopoly on security in this region. It is a result of two wars. First war, 2020 war in Nagorno-Karabakh, and second one, Ukrainian war. Russia is busy in their western border, and they're not going to open second front somewhere in the south. So we are inside the process of changing of role of Russia. Generally, I would say non-post-Soviet states, you can see, for example, what's going I'm not talking just about Ukraine. You can see what's going on in Moldova. You can see what's going on in Kazakhstan. Don't say about Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, etc. And Armenia is one of these examples. You have less and less Russia in this region, and I would say one more time that I don't know is it good or bad for Armenia, because different scenarios you can wait. And it depends on Ukrainian war and how it's going to continue or not to continue. We'll see. But we are inside these changes. Maybe I stop here. Thank you.
Let me unmute myself. Alexander, thank you very much. I see questions coming in. Please, we have a great audience here. Keep posting your questions. Tabit, I mentioned there are two to you. Anna, there's a question for you. Nerses, now over to you. You make some by the way, I really encourage all of you who live in the United States, read Nerses's article. It's very prescient, very relevant, and very informative. So I encourage you to do, all of them are, but if you're in the US, please read his article. So you make some very important points there. Says I'm going to read them quickly, and then I'll let you respond. U.S. policy in the South Caucasus is defined by three main pillars: regional stability, expansion of democracy, and long-term peace. You make that point. Second point that I extracted, in this context, the preservation and securing of Armenia's sovereignty and the security of its borders are of fundamental importance to America's interests. All right? And the third point you make, the US is addressing the problem of peace, quote unquote, the problem of peace in the region by not forcing Azerbaijan to come to terms, but rather by strengthening Armenia's ability to resist Azerbaijan, which in turn will change the entire power dynamics and the coercive approach of Baku. Over to you, Nerses, to address these points.
Thank you, Hriar. So just real quickly to provide a contextual background in U.S.-Armenia relations. It's one of the more intricate and complex ones because generally Armenia relations with other countries were defined by state-to-state dynamics. United States-Armenia relations, one of the rare ones where, aside from state-to-state dynamics, because of the very large Armenian diaspora, relations have also been defined by non-state actors such as Armenian ethnic lobbying organizations in DC, which have traditionally been very active in developing U.S. foreign policy or affecting it. So that dynamic in the past had a question of the extent to which the state centrism model was intricate to developing U.S. foreign policy towards Armenia, or whether U.S. foreign policy was more designed, at least at some level, appeasing American domestic audiences. The concern with this, of course, is that this struggled for the last 30 years to enhance and strengthen relations between Armenia and the U.S. And what we saw was that successive Armenian governments, until Armenia's Western pivot in 2022, consistently failed to convince Washington that Armenia should be prioritized within America's framework of what constitutes its strategic interests. So the broader attempts that we saw in Washington, whether it was traditional Armenian diaspora organizations or the Armenian state until the Western pivot attempting to make inroads, had proven to be, collectively speaking, a mosaic of underperformance. In that context, what Armenia has struggled to demonstrate until recently is to what extent are Armenia's interests important to American interests? And qualifying developments or understanding it through that lens offers us a bigger window in being able to gauge why U.S. does what it does, or why the U.S. doesn't do what it's supposed to do, or why it doesn't meet expectations, or why is it or isn't meeting these given expectations. So that conceptual background is very important in qualifying the relationship. Now, as Hriar's summary noted, U.S. policy in the South Caucasus right now is in essence defined by three pillars. The U.S. considers regional stability to be its number one objective, and there are a few reasons for this. One, should you have stability in the region, you alleviate conflict persistence. What this means is that Russia is able to maintain influence in the regions by having perpetual conflict. You remove that and have stability, Russia's influence in the region to a large extent diminishes. And so part of regional stability for the United States is diminishing Russian influence and potentially having a soft exit for Russia. And by soft exit, we're not talking about Russia leaving the region. That's not the point, but rather the extent to which Russia is a dominant hegemon in shaping the policies of the given actors in the region. The next pillar is the expansion of democracy, and this is not simply an ideational qualifier, but the fact that democracies tend to work better with one another. So if the United States is attempting to advance its interest in the South Caucasus, it would prefer to do that with strong democracies as opposed to having transactional relationships with non-democracies. So conceptually, a democratic Armenia or a democratic Georgia, this democratic dyad that many of us talk about, are an important part of U.S. understanding of advancing their interests in the region. And of course, long-term peace, right? The understanding is that if you have perpetual peace in the region, that the underlying issues are addressed. Again, for some of us, this is wishful thinking, but we're talking about concrete objectives of American policy. Long-term peace will basically allow for the strengthening of both regional economic considerations, democratic considerations, so on and so forth. So stability is a more direct objective. Expansion of democracy is a more intermediate objective. And of course, long-term peace is, the jury's out on this, but it also remains an important part of one of the pillars that shapes U.S. policy in the region. But more importantly, what we're seeing for the first time in a very, very long time is that the pillars of American foreign policy thinking or orientation in the region actually remain commensurate with Armenia's broader objectives in the region as well. So contextualized within this context, America's broader grand strategy for the South Caucasus, for the first time in probably forever, aligns with the strategic interests of Armenia. It is within that context that we're seeing Armenia's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and democracy becoming so relevant to American grand strategy. This is not simply lip service, but actually aligns with America's strategic interests. Now, more within this context is that the reason why stability in the South Caucasus is important to the strategic relevance of U.S. interests is that as long as you have situations where it is going to require American resources to at least mitigate conflict, or as long as it is going to allow regional actors or regional hegemons to utilize conflict to advance their interests and thus potentially mitigate America's interest in a given region, these configurations are an important attempt by the US to basically enhance its presence in the region. And it is better able to do that specifically in the South Caucasus by having regional stability. Also, the United States makes very clear that it is in its strategic interest to have expansion of trade and thus make the region a commercial hub. And so for economic growth to enhance itself and thus contribute to regional stability, the transatlantic footprint in the region requires some level of democratization and regional stability. Now, part of this dynamic, of course, is also when we're gauging U.S.-Armenia relations, is the exponential increase that we have seen in American soft power within Armenia. And this soft power tends to be rather organic. Several of my colleagues had mentioned the IRA survey that came out. It's not just the IRA survey. There's a lot of sort of, statistical research out there and survey findings that show United States has become one of the most dominant actors as far as Armenia's perceptivity goes. US remains very popular in Armenia. The European Union remains very popular in Armenia. So we see that the Western pivot does find a lot of support from the public. And what this means is that the West, specifically the United States, is exercising a lot of soft power influence. And so that also basically contributes to enhancing and strengthening of relations. But more to a more specific point, the conversation that we see with my policymakers in the United States is that when we talk about the South Caucasus and specifically the Eurasian space in general, the US does not have any organic allies. It has subsidized allies or partners. Its relationship with Azerbaijan, for example, is purely transactional, and values interests of both countries tend to be diametrically opposed, but the transactional element qualifies that. Same with Ukraine, for example, right? U.S. Relations with Ukraine and much of Central Asia is defined by U.S. subsidizing or providing material support or offering direct assistance as the cornerstone of maintaining these relationships. So collectively, the interactions and the engagement that the U.S. has with countries in Eurasia are defined by not pure alignment of interest or alliance conceptualizations, but rather transactional elements. Ukraine is a functional buffer against Russian expansionism, right? Azerbaijan is utilized as a potential mechanism of containing against Iran. These are instrumentalized approaches. With respect to Armenia, right, Armenia provides an organic base for potentially growing American public support and American soft power in the region. And this is a very cost-effective and sustainable model for the United States because it does not need to invest the level of resources that it does for its other partners in the region. So qualified within this perspective, Armenia is becoming a lot more interesting subject of consideration when we talk about U.S. Regional grand strategy. And then within this context, when we want to qualify the diminishing of Russian influence in the region, and this is clearly tied to the West's overarching approach with respect to Russia, the understanding is that Russia's entire southern Caucasus security architecture is hinged on Armenia being a cornerstone of its southern security flank. And so if Armenia or this cornerstone is removed from that security architecture, Russia's security architecture to a large extent collapses in the region. And this is precisely what we're seeing. Alexander mentioned this. The continuous diminishing of Russian influence in the region, right, isn't only about the Ukraine war. It's the fact that the previous hegemon almost has very little influence on Armenia. It has very little influence on Azerbaijan. While they collaborate, it's reciprocal, and its relationship or its influence on Georgia is also highly transactional. So conceptually, Russia has been reduced from being the most dominant actor to one that is struggling to sustain its influence. And this is precisely aligned with what the United States is seeking in the region. So advancing U.S.-Armenia relations and deepening it is not only specific to bilateral considerations, but also to produce geopolitical pluralism in the region. And finally, to kind of wrap up the conversation to address the last question that Hriar had posed, the United States right now fully accepts Armenia's Western pivot as being genuine, substantive, and playing an instrumental role in advancing U.S.-Armenia interests. At the same time, we're seeing that while Armenia's pivot is opening a lot of doors that Armenia did not have in the past with respect to accessing hard power capabilities, the United States is more than willing to engage with Armenia in enhancing its security architecture, in enhancing its capabilities, but this also does not translate at the same time to punishing Azerbaijan. And so American policy here, this quote unquote addressing the problem of peace, is actually quite nuanced. And while it might seem to be contradictory, America's approach is very, very different. Their argument is that while the United States fully supports Armenia's claims vis-a-vis Azerbaijan's aggressive demeanor, the United States is not ready to punish Azerbaijan for this demeanor. In that context, we have a very important phenomenon here. You have a region, right, that has issues of instability and severe power asymmetry, whereas Azerbaijan for the last 20 years has exponentially enhanced its security capabilities, while Armenia, being in Russia's dependency structure and for multiple reasons, failed to basically maintain the power parity. And so the discourse here is that if the United States wants stability in the region, if it wants peace in the region, you can't have those if you have power asymmetry between countries. So there are approaches that punishing Azerbaijan isn't going to produce a sustainable outcome. It's not going to produce peace. What's going to produce peace is if you close this power parity and you have a relative balance of power. And so the discourse is shifting to not about punishing Azerbaijan, but strengthening Armenia's capacity to resist Azerbaijan's maximalist or bellicose approaches. So in that context, we're seeing a growing presence of the United States as being an important figure or an important actor in Armenia's security architecture, which is a very new phenomenon when we consider the 35-year history of U.S.-Armenia relations. And I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to address questions as they come up.
Well, Nerses, thank you very much. It's a very broad, comprehensive view of the Armenia-U.S. relationship. So for the audience, we have a great audience. I see your questions. Keep posting them. And at the end, I'm not going to read those questions. It's going to take too much time. So to the panelists, please go through. Some of them are specifically addressed to some of you, as you make your presentations, and some of them are more general. Take a couple of minutes to answer them, so we answer as many of them as we can. But I do not plan to read them. Like I said, it's gonna take too much time. So we're gonna move on right now, and we have Yeghia Tashjian on the agenda. Yeghia, you cover the very important Armenian-India relationships. That's a developing story, and so you address that, and you make some important points that I'm going to quickly read here. In recent years, a strong political bond has been established between Yerevan and New Delhi. Your point now, that's one thing I extracted from your article. The second one, India's involvement in the South Caucasus has both geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions. It aims to establish itself as a reliable defense player globally and secure its national interests by containing the expansion of Turkish, Azerbaijan, Pakistan axis. Very interesting point. I think you all should listen to what Yeghia has to say about that axis, which is very relevant to Armenia's security. The third point you make, the proposed international north-south transport corridor, which will provide development opportunities for all communities from the north to the south of Armenia. That's the third. And the fourth, according to Armenia's Prime Minister Pashinyan, this project will enhance communication between Armenia and neighboring countries and diffuse tensions in the South Caucasus. Over to you, Yeghia.
Thank you, Hriar. Thank you also for the ARPA Institute for inviting me to this exciting family panel. So we'll be talking briefly about geopolitical and geoeconomic background of the Armenia-India partnership. So many Indians actually view Armenia as a stronghold against Turkey's pan-Turkic, let's say, aspirations in the region. Turkey's rapprochement with Pakistan and President Erdogan's remarks on Kashmir have created a certain anxiety, we can say, among Indian policymakers. And I remember this was very clear when first time I visited New Delhi in February 2020, where still Armenia and Indian defense relations were very immature. Even talking about them, people would be very surprised. So the 2020 war and Armenia's defeat in Nagorno-Karabakh and also against Turkey and Pakistani-backed Azerbaijan raised some concerns in New Delhi about the intention of this axis that was emerging in the region. However, one should also bear in mind that India's involvement in South Caucasus and its military backup to Armenia is not only limited to geopolitical factors. New Delhi has also geoeconomic interests in the region within the north-south connectivity, trade linking the Indian Ocean to northern Russia and the Baltic Sea. So first, let's identify India's geoeconomic and geopolitical interests in the region. As we said, India's main geoeconomic interest in South Caucasus is the realization of the international north-south transport corridor. This is not a new initiative. Actually, this initiative goes back to 2000, 2001, when Russia, Iran, and India, they drafted this project, which is like 7,200 kilometers of model of ship network and railroad and road project to facilitate trade in Eurasia. Iran actually is a key transit player in this connectivity, and Armenia also can become a potential player. There were many articles published in the Indian newspapers about this issue, why Armenia can play important transit role. But also geopolitically, they stress a lot on the three brothers, which is Turkey, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan, and Armenia should become the stronghold to deter or contain the influence of this axis or alliance in the region. Moreover, also expansion of BRICS in January 2024, I believe that should also give additional motivation for Armenia to apply to such structures, even as an observer member, to increase its also economic and political interaction with rising Eurasian powers, such as, India and China. And I believe that this can be also be seen as an important step in the sense of positioning Armenia in a regional multipolar system, and also sending a clear signals to Moscow that Yerevan does not intend to join anti-Russian alliance and is even ready to cooperate with other supra-regional organizations where Russia values its membership in the multipolar worldview. The question now is about the north-south transport route corridor, where Armenia is trying to push this initiative. So given the challenges posed by Armenia's infrastructure and the lack of railway connection with some of its neighboring countries, mainly Iran, compared to Azerbaijan's crucial role in the international north-south transport corridor, so Yerevan is pushing actually for alternative corridor, which is called the Black Sea Persian Gulf corridor, which connects Georgia to Iran via Armenia's ambitious north-south transport road corridor. So this road is actually one of the largest projects in the history of independent Armenia. This project aims to reduce also the distance from Iran to Georgia, and also would simplify Armenia's access to the Black Sea and the Persian Gulf, even the Middle East and the Asian markets. So India and Iran actually are encouraging Armenia to take active role in this transport link, and already in late January 2024, Iran granted Armenia access to its Jahapar and the Bandar Abbas port to facilitate Armenia's trade with neighboring countries. So the implementation of this project, I mean, it's very long, but I wrote actually a book chapter will be published soon about it on the human security in Armenia, especially in the bordering villages in Sunik and so on. So the implementation will also improve the socioeconomic condition in the villages and rural area, and most importantly, in the strategic Sunik. To talk very briefly about the security dimension, I'm not a military expert, but Armenia had shown interest in the Indian weaponry even before the 2020 war. We already remember in March 2020, Yerevan signed a $40 million arms deal to supply the Swati radar to detect actually location of weapons. And after the May 2021 and September 2022 Azerbaijan incursions on Armenian territory and Russia's inability to supply us with advanced weapons, Armenia started searching alternative defense market and aimed to diversify its security partners. India was actually one of the best candidates, so Armenia bought a lot of Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launchers, and I will not name, there were a lot of howitzers, but most important, the Akash missile, which was also reported in the Indian media. This is very important because Akash missile is like an anti-air defense system, and it effectively engages with not just UAVs, but also fighter jets and helicopters. And according to the data, the range, it's in the range of 4 to 25 kilometers, and is also immune to active and passive jamming. So with the deepening of this military relations, both countries also can find ways to strengthen their security ties, such as intelligence sharing, joint military exercises, and also Armenian officers, I mean, graduating from Indian military schools, and also inviting Indian military advisors to Yerevan. To conclude or reflect, the defense partnership, actually, or the relationship is between India and Armenia is a testament for also India's growing role in the global defense sector and Armenia's strategy to diversify its defense partnerships. Geopolitically, by arming Armenia, Yerevan will become also a deterrent force against the three brothers, as India calls. And within this context, the Indian-Armenian arms trade can be also a win-win solution for both countries. And here it is also important to highlight that maybe Moscow may realize in the future that India's involvement in the region and its positive economic ties with India and even Azerbaijan when it comes to energy security may stabilize the South Caucasus through the North-South connectivity, and also reversing the current military balance in the region. Thank you.
You're mute, Hriar. You're mute.
I am sorry. Thank you, Yeghia. I appreciate it very much. So we're going to move on. Next is Sossi Tatikyan. And Sossi, I want to thank you right up front. Sossi stepped in the last minute to cover a very important topic. Armenia-AU relationship was a gap in our report. So Sossi stepped in, and she was very kind to do it very fast. So Sossi, I have three questions for you. The European Union launched a civilian mission in Armenia. It's called EUMA in your article. And you go over the reasons of the EU's interest in deploying such a mission. So you go into that. Second point is you explain how the EUMA fits within the common security and defense policy? And then the third, you raise the issue, how far can Armenia go with its EU aspirations, question mark. Will it seek close relationship or membership, question mark. Sossi, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I feel I've been dealing with this topic both as a policy expert, working with EU completely on voluntary basis as part of informal diplomacy in the last 3 years, as well as writing some policy and academic articles about the topic. And just 2 weeks ago, all EU member state ambassadors to Political and Security Committee of the European Union visited Armenia, and we briefed them, requested by the EU delegation, and Alexander was also there, about our perspectives on Armenia's foreign and security policy and the situation. So I'm happy to talk about this mission, about this topic. And Armenia-EU relations have various aspects, because Armenia has this agreement, comprehensive partnership agreement with the EU, which has a lot of different aspects, such as economy, trade. However, I am not an expert in economy and trade, so I will focus on 2 aspects: security issues, in particular EU mission in Armenia, but not only, because EU has a wider role. And the second, Armenia's newly shaping aspirations for the EU membership. This mission is something we have advocated for, several as experts and civil society figures in Armenia, and I've been one of them. We have advocated for it both to our authorities and to the European Union. And to be frank, I believe this mission is the best thing EU has ever done for Armenia. At the same time, it's important to understand what it is, to avoid exaggerated, unrealistic expectations, and be very realistic about the role of the mission. When Azerbaijan started creeping annexation of border areas of Armenia in 2021, Armenia first expected CSTO or Russia to intervene and support Armenia as its ally, according to CSTO obligations. But it didn't happen. And we can analyze reasons for a long time, but the bottom line is that CSTO member states have more common values as well as geopolitical interests with Azerbaijan than with Armenia in the last several years. It's basically most of the countries in CSTO are autocratic to various degree, perhaps Kazakhstan being the best in that picture. Also because at least half of its members are Turkic states with obvious common interests with Azerbaijan. And also in light of the changes and transformation in Armenia-Russia relationship and Russia's stigmatization on international scene. Russian CSTO didn't even acknowledge, even during the meetings in the UN Security Council, that Azerbaijan has clearly violated Armenia's territorial integrity, even after September 23 invasion of Azerbaijan in Jermuk. The UN Security Council meeting was convened by France, not by Russia. And the positions of the US, France, and EU members of the UN Security Council were more supportive for Armenia than those of Russia. Russian representative would even repeat some Azerbaijani narratives during UN Security Council meetings, both on Armenia's territorial integrity and also later on in 2013, since December 22, about the blockade and military offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh. Therefore, Armenia was frustrated, and according to reports, it was U.S. Secretary of State Blinken who played an instrumental role in stopping the military offensive in Jermuk by Azerbaijan. And also EU made quite clear statements about it. Now, when we remember EU's and US positions to Nagorno-Karabakh issue, to be very frank, they were quite frustrating, because they were trying to use this liberal peace theory with Azerbaijan, which is obviously an autocratic, aggressive, militaristic state, and it failed. And we were warning the US and EU in our informal diplomatic capacity as experts that it was going to fail, and that's exactly what happened. However, US and EU have been showing more clear and more or less robust position to Armenia's territorial integrity. Why is it that? First of all, it's about the principle of territorial integrity, which became kind of an absolute principle in light of the war in Ukraine, because all other principles, self-determination, etc., kind of lost their importance and were undermined, and territorial integrity and sovereignty became #1 principles. Second, US and EU were, of course, criticized a lot for their soft mediation and diplomacy in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. In particular, EU was criticized for its gas deal with Azerbaijan in July 2022, after which Azerbaijan started the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, and before that launched invasion in Jermuk. And EU has been positioning itself as a normative actor that is promoting liberal values of democracy and human rights. And of course, Armenia is considered the democratic country in the region. Well, it's always a competition between Armenia and Georgia in the last several years, who is more democratic. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's them. It depends on the year. And EU had to balance between its geopolitical and normative roles. And also, it realized most likely that another large-scale war may happen in the European neighborhood, and it would just add to the burden of the EU as well as the US in light of the war in Ukraine, and it would become very difficult to manage. That's why the EU stepped in. Well, of course, the Prague statement is controversial. It was adopted on 8 October, 3 weeks after the invasion in Jermuk, and we know that Armenia recognized Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, and by the same statement, it was decided to deploy EU mission in Armenia. I have to say that this was an unprecedented decision by the EU because of several factors. First of all, because Azerbaijan didn't want this mission. However, there were those few days after the Jermuk invasion when it was possible to convince Azerbaijan to agree on the deployment of the mission on the Armenian side, not on the border, because the ideal situation would be if the mission would be deployed on the border and also on Azerbaijani side, but it was not possible to convince Azerbaijan. But EU wanted some kind of green light from Azerbaijan, even for deploying it in Armenia. And Aliyev kind of agreed. during the week following the German invasion. I'm sure he has regretted about it deeply. And the mission was there was a need for consensus by the EU member states, because EU is a consensus-based organization, and no country should veto a deployment of the mission. And of course, there were a lot of concerns, especially about Hungary, with which Armenia had suspended diplomatic relations in relation to the murder of Officer Margarian by Ramil Safarov, as well as other countries such as Italy that gets a lot of gas from Azerbaijan. However, the consensus was achieved and EU deployed very, very quickly. This was unprecedented by its speed for the EU. First, they deployed 40 monitors, deducted them from the mission in Georgia, and then there was another political decision in December about deployment of a long-term mission, and EU launched its proper mission in Armenia in February 23. Moreover, it decided to expand this mission after the military offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh. And from 100, it is expanded to 209. 23 EU member countries are contributing to the mission. And also Canada is contributing with one advisor, and soon Norway, which is not an EU member, will also contribute. So what is the role of this mission? It is civilian, not armed. As Aliyev teased them 3 days ago, they do binocle diplomacy. That's what Aliyev said. So it's a monitoring mission. They conduct patrols and they report to Brussels. Our illiberal opposition spread this information in April 23 that they are spying for Azerbaijan. However, the reports are not seen not only by Azerbaijan, but even by Armenia. The reports go straight to Brussels, to EU member countries. Before this mission was deployed, Azerbaijan was spreading this information all the time, that anything that happens on the border, any military accident and disinformation, is provoked by Armenia. And Armenia was not able to prove that it's Azerbaijan, and Armenia has no interest to provoke any incident. However, EU member countries were confused and didn't know whom to believe. Now it's more or less clear, because although EU mission avoids making explicit political statements, however, they every day, literally every day, there is a delegation from some EU member country, and it has become kind of like conflict sightseeing. They go and visit EU HQ, which is not in Yerevan, which is a good thing. It's in Yeregnadzor, and it has field offices in Ijevan, in Kapan, in Goris, etc. And they show and they brief them, and they explain the situation, which is very positive. And not surprisingly, Russia and Azerbaijan have launched increasing and intensifying hybrid war against this mission, disinformation, false narratives, and especially in the last several months after the collapse of the Nagorno-Karabakh, they are very focused to delegitimize this mission. So why this mission is a soft deterrent for Armenia's border security? Given the military imbalance between Armenia and Azerbaijan, there are only 2-3 factors that actually prevent Azerbaijan to attack Armenia. Well, of course, one of them is Iran. One of them is the political position of the US and EU. And finally, this mission, because it really it cannot do anything if Azerbaijan attacks. And 3 days ago, Aliyev again mentioned in his statement that EU monitors should actually be grateful to Azerbaijan that they are not targeted by Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan even uses very threatening language about them. However, the assumption is that it's exactly because Azerbaijan has this gas deal with EU, and it also has a new initiative, this so-called mid-corridor. It is now trying to position itself as an important actor in this mid-corridor connecting Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Europe. It will avoid doing something completely explicitly violating all red lines because it realizes that there will be political costs for it. About Armenia's EU aspirations. First of all, it's related also to CSTO membership and also Eurasian Customs Union membership. As we know, Armenia has suspended its membership in CSTO, not legally, but de facto, since November 2020. And most likely, at one point, Armenia will walk away from CSTO legally. In any case, to be frank, the West, to my impression, doesn't even pressure Armenia any longer to quit CSTO because the West considers that it's kind of a done deal. Armenia is not participating in any CSTO activity and hasn't received any military or security assistance from CSTO for many, many years. And CSTO tried to send a monitoring mission to Armenia, but only after it realized that EU will deploy a mission. So basically, it was an attempt by CSTO and Russia to prevent the deployment of the EU mission. However, Armenia had already made its choice and it was already frustrated with CSTO. So CSTO is not a big problem. A more significant problem, although again, I'm not an economist, is Eurasian Economic Union. Why? Because Armenian economy is completely part of this Eurasian market. Armenian economy receives about 2-3 billion dollars per year from this market. And if Armenia withdraws from this union, Armenian economy will simply collapse. So it's not something like CSTO. Armenia cannot just boycott and suspend its membership quickly. It should try to diversify its economy and redirect its market very, very gradually. And that's exactly why this April 5 meeting with State Secretary Blinken and EU took place. And EU and Armenia are trying to help Armenia to develop its economic resilience, to diversify its economy after diversifying its security. So returning security, as we know, France was the first country, EU member country and Western country that broke the taboo and sold military equipment to a CSTO member country. This is really invaluable. However, it's important to note here that even not all EU member countries are excited about this. There is some internal criticism addressed to France, although Italy and Bulgaria on their turn sell military equipment to Azerbaijan, from which Italy is selling Leonardos, which is very significant and very serious. So I think I talked too long. And about membership, I will add that Armenia expressed EU membership aspirations for the first time informally, hinting about it in November last year. And it hasn't applied for it formally. and it's considering what is the good momentum to apply for it. And of course, there is no any guarantee that the EU membership will be successful for Armenia, and it will happen anytime soon, because we know that EU has very strict criteria called Copenhagen criteria, and any country that has become an EU member state since the end of the Cold War has passed through this very long road, and it's both political and economic and rule of law and democracy criteria. It's a long way. And however, if Armenia misses the train, which already kind of missed, because Ukraine, Moldova, and even Georgia received the invitation, but Armenia is still shaping its aspirations, it will basically mean that Armenia will get stuck in regionalism, and in the region it's surrounded with Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran, and even if it's a friendly country to us, but it's still autocratic, and it will be very difficult for Armenia. However,
we need to, if you could take 30 seconds just to end it, so we can address some of the questions. Yeah, please.
Sure. Yeah. But I also agree with Yeghia that even if Armenia takes this road to EU membership, it should not just cooperate with the West. It should try a multipolar foreign and security diplomacy. It should continue to develop its relationship with India and Iran in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to be here with you, connect with everyone on this platform. And without further ado, let's dive right into the questions. I observe in the paper that Azerbaijan has never been interested in genuine peace for the sake of peace itself. We may find this position unfair, unjust, and egocentric, but it is primarily driven by the political considerations, and mostly this is the thing that every state does. Azerbaijan appears to grasp the real balance of power in the region, especially considering its proximity to Russia, to Turkey, Iran, states with significant strategic interests and military capabilities, who are ready and capable of moving armies in the region. Amidst the efforts of major global powers like US, United Kingdom, France, China, who are seeking opportunities to advance their geopolitical agendas in this era of international political turbulence, Azerbaijan, having emerged as a victorious party in the recent conflict with Armenia, finds itself in both advantageous and vulnerable positions. The stakes and challenges are significantly higher around the diplomatic table, given the involvement of major powers with diverse agendas. The current state of affairs remains unsettled, and major powers yet to define their desired outcomes in the region, in South Caucasus, and in the broader sense of Middle East. Azerbaijan, deeply integrated into the regional economic infrastructures and maintaining beneficial trade relations with all stakeholders is economically stable, much more stable even, and is in a comfort zone. In contrast to this, Armenia continues to struggle with regional blockades, limited economic growth prospects, and constraining opportunities. So far, Azerbaijan has succeeded in keeping Armenia under pressure, leveraging its advantageous position, and both politically and geographically. As long as there are no clear rules of game in the Caucasus yet, as long as there are no aforementioned actors who would set the zones of interest here, put boundaries, or even claim to have certain degree of agreement about influencing zones here, Azerbaijan will wait for the right moment. This moment might arise when international tensions ease and the dynamics between United States and Russia evolve into a phase that determines the fate of the South Caucasus, whether it becomes a gray zone, a neutral zone, or remains within Russian sphere of influence. I don't know, whatever. Currently, the region remains in an ambiguous and uncertain status quo, largely shaped by Russian interests and priorities, I think. And Azerbaijan seems to understand these realities and operates within these confines, aware that it has the luxury of time to negotiate and sign a peace treaty whenever it feels to be satisfied. Currently, there are only two principal issues where Azerbaijan has shown reluctance to compromise, yet it could choose to drop these excuses and pursue peace whenever it deems fit. However, for now, it prefers to maintain a strategic advantage over Armenia while waiting for a more favorable geopolitical climate in the meantime, hanging, let's say, Damoclean sword on Armenia's head. When it comes to your second question, I have noticed that Aliyev has demonstrated a keen sense of timing and momentum on multiple occasions. Having achieved all its objectives in Karabakh, Azerbaijan sees no immediate need to rush into signing a deal, especially given the current international climate that is not conducive to peace and cooperation. Azerbaijan has effectively shifted the military conflict into Armenian territory, securing critical strategic positions and imposing significant consequences on Armenia whenever it deems necessary. Constant threats of war and accusations of Armenia being controlled by external forces have created a situation where the specter of a new conflict, which Armenia desperately tries and seeks to avoid, is contingent on Azerbaijan's goodwill and lack of thereof. As negotiations for peace persist, more Azerbaijan demands. With each round of talks, more Armenia concedes. Azerbaijan adapts a maximalist stance, introducing preconditions that deviate from internationally accepted principles such as sovereignty, jurisdiction, equality, and reciprocity. This approach seems to be stemmed from Azerbaijan's awareness that it can drop these preconditions and sign the peace treaty as is whenever it deems fit, confident that it might secure more favorable terms than those currently on the table. Without a significant shift in the power dynamics favoring Armenia, major powers are unlikely to pressure Azerbaijan, I think, and into an immediate peace deal. Russia, in particular, shows no interest in altering the existing status quo yet, uh, which we can formulate as neither peace nor war. Therefore, Azerbaijan lacks the incentive to hastily and rashly sign a peace treaty. Here are three possible scenarios for Azerbaijan signing the peace treaty. First, that Russia actively promotes peace in the South Caucasus. Second, the Western powers exert pressure on Azerbaijan to conclude peace talks, leading to a more balanced treaty that recognizes mutual territorial integrity and borders fixed in 1991 according to Almaty Declaration, while also opening communications based on the aforementioned principles. I would like to stress this part here, the opening of communications based on aforementioned four principles. And the third scenario is that Armenia agrees to Azerbaijan's preconditions, prompting Azerbaijan to either sign the treaty or risk being seen as an unreliable partner by the West. However, signing peace treaty with Armenia is not the end itself, because the treaty itself will not secure peace and establish normal cooperative relations. Azerbaijan still demands the corridor and makes it condition to the opening of borders and connections. Additionally, there is a third condition here. They are pressuring for Russian forces to be in this corridor. And that's why Azerbaijan, even there is a scenario that Azerbaijan might sign a peace agreement, even an obscure one, but still keep close the connections and roads and not establishing trade relations with Armenia, like we have Armenian-Turkish relations here. And when it comes to your third question, after the 2020 war, Aliyev has repeatedly emphasized Azerbaijan's restoration of territorial integrity, its emergence as a major regional power with abundant resources, unparalleled independence, and a leading role in the Caucasus. Paying attention to Azerbaijan's statements regarding Russia, Iran, reveals its attempts to position itself as a somewhat equal, engaging even in disputes and political debates with Iran. And even you all remember, I suppose, that Azerbaijan has claimed more than once that Russia has acknowledged the new realities in the Caucasus, which are shaped by Azerbaijan. It showcases the image it seeks to project. Furthermore, Azerbaijan actively collaborates with China, enjoys robust support from Turkey, and in its turn, it reciprocates assistance to President Erdogan when it's necessary. This proactive engagement portrays Azerbaijan as a significant player here, standing firm and deeply involved in regional affairs. I'd like to stress the propaganda factor here as well, when Azerbaijani media consistently reinforces this narrative of a nation that has ascended to a new level and operates in a different league now. On a different note, Azerbaijan adopts a distinct approach in its relations with Armenia and Georgia. In Georgian case, Azerbaijan emphasizes friendship and historical ties, positioning the two countries as united in safeguarding regional peace and stability. Notably, Georgia served as a crucial link for Azerbaijan to access Turkey, thereafter Europe, indicating Azerbaijan's economic interests in Georgia. With a significant Azerbaijani population and substantial investment in Georgia, Azerbaijan has established a strong presence in Georgia, effectively subordinating it economically. Georgia benefits from Azerbaijani investments, leading to economic growth and dependency on Azerbaijan, compounded by Turkey's influence and tensions with Russia. Conversely, relations with Armenia are significantly more complex due to historical enmity and conflicts exacerbated by external interference. The aftermath of the 2020 war, where Armenia persisted in its stance on Karabakh self-determination principle, signaled to Azerbaijan that the conflict was ongoing and pressuring Armenia remained for a priority for it. Azerbaijan has undertaken three military operations: May 2021, November 2021, September 2022, and by seizing Armenian territories, almost 150 square kilometers, and strategically important heights and hills to control key roads and points, while also continuously responding disproportionately and maintaining military pressure on Armenia. This strategy aims to keep Armenia economically constrained and militarily threatened, showcasing Azerbaijan's sub-hegemonic behavior, a mix of economic coercion and military control. While Azerbaijan has not yet fully transitioned its relations with Armenia to one of economic dependency, its actions clearly indicate a desire to keep Armenia under influence and control using economic leverage and military force as a tool of subjugation. Thank you. Two words to address what's happening on the ground right now. You are all well aware that recently Armenia and Azerbaijan have reached an important agreement on the issue of delimitation, at least laying the groundwork for it based on Almaty Declaration of 1991, and basing the process on this declaration, a step that Azerbaijan has initially rejected and continues to reject. I mean the inclusion of this provision in the peace treaty. It suggests that the process needs to be examined in a broader spectrum, taking into account the current situation in Armenia as well as Azerbaijan's relations with Iran, Russia, the West. I think that it's clear that the Iran-Israeli conflict is also impacting this region, and obviously the policy Azerbaijan pursues towards Russia, towards Iran, towards Israel should be concerned here. Not sticking to speculations and instead turning to facts, Armenia and Azerbaijan's statement on the delimitation process has a grave and serious, still unnoticed provision. Let me quote it. The parties have agreed that the process of delimitation will be based on the Almaty Declaration of 1991. The parties have also arranged to stipulate this fundamental principle in the draft regulation, in the brackets, in the future, in case the agreement on establishment of peace and interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan provides otherwise, the relevant clause of the regulation will be brought into compliance with the principles as prescribed by this agreement. I think that this leaves a serious concern that Azerbaijan may reconsider its approach after current phase, opting for different methodologies in other segments of the border delimitation. There are risks that Azerbaijan might agree to border delimitation on the Almaty Declaration for the northern part of the border, but push forward of creating new borders, new maps for the south part of the border, and in order not to withdraw its troops from the occupied territories and heights in Sunik and Bayezid. However, all agreements are the reflection of compromises, and it seems to be very good development that both countries had agreed on something. This boosts the peace process itself. I think Aliyev currently rejects any mediation, and he speaks loudly and publicly about it. And Azerbaijan believes that without third parties, it will be easier to come to an agreement. As balance of power is disturbed between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the favor of the latter, Azerbaijan will have much more room to pressure Armenia and incline it to its positions. As I have written in the paper, Azerbaijan can sign peace treaty when it needs. Its needs are reflected in the treaty and covered by appropriate provisions. On the other hand, Armenia is in desperate need to have a peace treaty and neutralize any threat of possible war or military escalation. It has been said that Azerbaijan can afford itself flexibility and luxury in signing the peace treaty whenever it suits it. And this perception sustains as Azerbaijan is still not on board with having Almaty Declaration unequivocally and imperatively mentioned in the peace treaty as a basis for the delimitation process. Clearly, Azerbaijan prefers to leave all possible options on the table to maintain maximum room for its maneuvering, especially in the changing global and regional environment. The situation gets much more confusing when Russia's sudden decision to remove the troops from Karabakh is concerned. It is a serious move that still needs to be addressed and analyzed comprehensively, in my understanding. So to sum up, taking into account the recent developments, it seems that Azerbaijan continues to act within the framework of having a status quo in the region. I would say in alignment with Russian interests as well here. And in relations with Armenia, there could be three possible scenarios and outcomes here. First, the maintenance of current status quo, unless there are some big changes in the world or in the region. Second possible outcome is signing an ambiguous peace treaty with Armenia, and not opening the communications and borders at all. Something like we see in Armenian-Turkish relations. There is no war, but there is no partnership or cooperation there. And the third possible outcome, is to sign a peace treaty. But this peace treaty, in Azerbaijan's understanding, should reflect Azerbaijan's principal preconditions as well as Russian primary interests. Thank you.
So here's what I suggest we do. There are lots of questions, so let me start off with the order we had this, and please maybe take some closing remarks and quickly address the issues that were raised to you specifically. So few minutes, so we don't want to go too much over. We have about maybe 10, 15 minutes left. So Tavit, let's start with you. David, are you good?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes closing remarks, and there were questions addressed to you. If you want to address them quickly, please go ahead, and then we'll move on.
There's a question by Anna Ohanyan for you, David.
Yes, okay. I saw the questions. Thank you, Anna. And I think there are two questions. One is about the Turkey as an energy transit hub. And the second was from another person about the shift in Erdogan's politics or policy from zero problems to problems with everyone. On the first, I think, question, Turkey indeed. I went into much deeper analyzing the differences between possible differences or fault lines between Azerbaijan and Turkey, but naturally they have many things in common. And one of them is the Turkish intention to be the energy hub. And for now, it is Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan, and also the natural gas pipeline. But potentially, as Sossi also mentioned, the middle corridor from Kazakhstan. For now, Kazakhstan is mostly forced to send through Russian pipelines to the Black Sea, but they are exploring the option to send the oil to Azerbaijan, to Turkey, and further to Europe also, which gives them alternative. And Tengiz oil field is one of the largest in the world. So that's why I think Azerbaijan and Turkey are connected. In addition to this, China has invested in the last few years a lot in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, and Turkey under the Belt and Road. I think $1 billion plus in Georgia and Azerbaijan, and a few billions in Turkey also. And this is beyond energy also. It is more the Chinese goods going to Azerbaijan, to Turkey, to Europe also. So a lot is happening there, and I think we have to be mindful. For me, it is important that we are not totally missed out from those opportunities also. We spoke a lot about the criticality of the Zangezur corridor and not giving concessions also, but from the other side, there could be some lost opportunities. But second question, from zero problem to many problems with all the neighbors, I think there are two reasons from my take. One is this Erdogan's very erratic behavior usually. I mean, in economy, for first few years, he adopted very rational, scientific approach to economic, and Turkey managed to make a big leap in economic development his first few years of leadership. And then after he moved to more faith-based decisions, I mean, controlling interest rate, hyperinflation, etc. And the same thing, it happened again. His back and forth, his the personality somehow matters in this case. But in addition to this, I think it was also the new opportunities from Erdogan's perspective, like Arab Spring, collapsing Syria, Libya, etc. He felt this is the moment he can grab things. And then he got into Syria, first to control the Kurds, but also to get some parts of the Syrian sovereign state under the Turkish control, etc. So that's why, to me, it is a mix of personality of Erdogan, but also some opportunities. And eventually, the world moved from this rational, normalcy to grabbing what you can. I mean, Russia and many others, Azerbaijan, etc. And one concluding remark I want to make about overall our discussion. I think we have to be mindful not to divide the world on friends and enemies and try to look opportunities all. It includes Turkey, it includes Azerbaijan, China also, Israel, which is seen as a friend of Azerbaijan and by default the enemy of ours, etc. So there are many opportunities, I think, around us. So we have many challenges also. And in each case, we have to do our best to explore and identify what are specific, like Armenia and Israel, Armenia and Turkey, Armenia and Azerbaijan, whether we can find anything in common and helping both of us to move forward, and how to exploit and then to build some sort of connecting and joint agendas also. It is, of course, not easy, and there are many challenges, emotional, historic, and recent also war-related. But for me, this is the right way forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Tabi. Thank you very much. Anna, over to you. Your closing remarks.
Thank you so much. For closing remarks, I will add some issues concerning peculiarities of Iran's policy in our region. In my report, I write also about Iran-France cooperation, and I mentioned that ambassadors of France and Iran met during the September 2023 and also posted about the meeting. And I had an opportunity to be present at the discussion with the ambassador of Iran and asked about the political message of not only meeting of the ambassadors, but also decision to have a press release about it. And so ambassador replied that this is a clear message to Armenian public that Iran's and France's attitude towards Armenia's security are very much alike. And also about the issue spoke also the ambassador of France during an interview last month. And so this is a very important feature in our region, cooperation of countries that have many problems with each other in different other areas, but having the same attitude towards the territorial integrity of Armenia and security issues of Armenia. And I also wanted to mention that it's also interesting and I guess important to mention that related to the April 5 trilateral meeting in Brussels, meeting between EU, US, and also Armenia, we had very strong condemnation and condemning statements coming from Turkey and Russia. But as I understand, Iran refused to join such kind of condemnations and had only a statement coming from the spokesperson of MFA saying that Iran is opposing extra-regional military presence. And so that was one more important political message to show that there are opportunities for cooperation also between the EU and Iran in our region. Concerning the question I have from Chris Zavik, why Azerbaijan prefers this extraterritorial corridor over the transit route passing through Iran. So for several reasons, but first of all, it's the extraterritorial corridor Azerbaijan imagines and demands from Armenia is something totally different from transit route logic, and it will be, they want it to be unimpeded without any customs control. And also this will be very important political gain, not only for Azerbaijan, but also for the overall Turkic so-called Turan strategy in the region. And also when considering the possibility of involving this corridor in the so-called middle corridor strategy, it is important to have a part that is bypassing any sanctioned country. So it's not only about Iran's political and economic leverage on Azerbaijan, but also a fact that the route passes through country, this time Iran, that is under sanctions. And also not to diminish the importance of Iran's political and economic leverage having this transit route. And so that's why Iran also says that this project of Armenian government called Crossroads of Peace, it's the only way Iran will support the deblocking of communication in the region. We can argue that this is because Iran perceives it unrealistic project, because even this status quo of having a blockade of communication in the region is in the interest of Iran. So we can argue, is it this way, or the logic of the project indeed is in line of their interest, but in coming from the high level statements, they stress that this is the only way they will support the deblocking of communication. So, and thank you for
thank you, Anna. Very thank you.
And
yeah, thank you for your comments. Yep. Let's move on. Alexander, over to you. Any closing remarks from your end?
Okay. Questions from Carol. Armenia ceded territories in an effort to sign a peace accord with Azerbaijan. Does the strategy of land for peace work? No. Azerbaijan does need peace. Then, what do you think the Russian gained in return of leaving NK before November 25? There are rumors that Turks wanted to open, or Azerbaijanis wanted Turkey to open a military base in Azerbaijan. I'm no supporter of conspiracy theories. I really think nothing. The peacekeeping forces, Russian so-called peacekeeping forces, they were dysfunctional after the deportation after the exodus of Armenian population, and maybe it was part of gain up, but in different format. Because if you look from Armenia, if you look from Yerevan, this questions could be existential for Armenians, but for Russia, it's part of very wide mosaic of Russian, Turkish, Russian, Azerbaijani, Carbons, etc. situation. So it could be somewhere in different place, but generally, I don't think that it was a real deal. And for economy, I'm not an economist, but last thing I want to say about Azerbaijan as a petrostate, monarchy, and collapsing such kind of states, economies, etc. The main problem of Armenia, I would say, is not even conflict with Azerbaijan now. The main conflict of Armenia, it's a conflict of, I would call it, time paradigms. I'll try to explain in a couple of sentences. Everything which Armenia can do by weapon, build reforms in army, political forms of security, diplomatic artificial structures or formats for security, etc., economy development, meritocracy, problems with elites, etc. All these you in principle can do in short period. All these programs can be long-term programs. You need at least years, if not generations for them. Risks are extremely short. Azerbaijan can do what Azerbaijan can do in 2 hours. That's a problem. That's the main problem. Because you can do a lot of things, give territories to Azerbaijan, give, I don't know, the delimited border, etc., etc. But the problem of this time paradigm conflict is here at its main problem, and maybe Azerbaijan will collapse as Venezuela or I don't know, other petrostates in 20 years or 200 years, but maybe we will have our problems in a week. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Nerses, over to you. A couple of minutes, closing remarks, anything big picture you want to state?
Thank you, Hriar. There were two quick questions I'll address. One pertains to the success of Georgia's lobbying efforts in the United States and how Armenia, having more bit stronger of a diaspora, has had, relatively speaking, weaker outcomes. Georgia has had strong support from the U.S. Senate. Armenia has always struggled to have strong support in the Senate. In that context, Georgia has always had the issue that they are a pro-Western, pro-U.S. actor, and that has worked in D.C. Our problem is that from the Kocharian administration all the way to the Velvet Revolution, in DC, we were viewed as a Russian satellite. And as a Russian satellite, that perceptivity diminished your capacity to lobby well. In that context, we lost the narrative in DC, therefore our lobbying efforts struggled because of that component. And in that context, Georgians were ahead of the game, while Armenia was basically telling the United States to support a Russian ally that was working to advance Russia's interests in the region. That was not going to work. This is why we have not been successful in DC in relative terms. And then the question does ask, how do we need to improve lobbying in DC? Most definitely. If we're going to look at this purely in empirical terms, our lobbying institutions, to a large extent, have failed. There was no outcome in the 2020 war. The Armenian caucus was not very productive. We have not had any legislation passed that has produced any success. These are just empirical assessments. So there needs to be severe paradigm shifts in the modality of lobbying organizations because Azerbaijan has been defeating Armenia in the lobbying game in DC for the last 20 years. Whatever the strategic differences are, that's a different subject of conversation. But right now, that remains the factual basis. And I'm depoliticizing this. I'm basically going off of the outcomes that we have seen and the diminishing influence of Armenian lobby when it comes to advocating for the Republic of Armenia. And so a big part of that has been the perception that Armenia is a Russian vassal. Now, the next question kind of ties into this that was asked is, what are the risks of Armenia's Western pivot? And is it dangerous to basically rely on the United States? I think there's a general misunderstanding of what the Western pivot constitutes. It's not about asking the United States to be Armenia's security guarantor. The Western pivot is to leave Russia's sphere of influence, to no longer be a Russian vassal, and thus to exercise independent foreign policy. Thus, the pivot is directional. It is a directional shift towards an independent foreign policy. But because that pivot has to be towards the West, that is the objective. And as Sossi noted, the Russian-led security architecture completely collapsed. So either Armenia pivots and diversifies its foreign security policy, or it remains in a state of severe vulnerability. So the only way Armenia could address the security problems that we face from Azerbaijan is to develop deterrence capabilities. You can't do that in Russia's sphere or as a Russian vassal. That we saw that it failed. And so our access to hard power capabilities, our ability to develop deterrence capacity required a pivot away from Russia and towards a more independent foreign policy. This is why the pivot is qualified as being Western, that it is directionally away from Russia. It's not ideational saying Armenia is embracing the West as a security guarantor. Those conversations are untrue and suggest a misunderstanding. So in that context, right, the relationships with Europe, the relationship with the United States, the growing relationship with Canada, et cetera, it's about not putting all of your eggs in one basket like we did for 30 years, but rather having access to the various security partners that could address and help you mitigate the large number of problems you have. So contextually, when it comes to the big picture, we need to understand that Armenia is devassalizing, right? We are no longer a Russian satellite. And in that context, we need to have a conversation about Armenia's strategic interests and no longer about Russia's strategic interests. For 25 years, Armenian foreign policy was reliant on Russia. You could do what Russia told you to do, and you cannot do what Russia told you to do. So anytime you try to exercise independence, Russia will smack you down. We saw this in 2013 when Sarkisyan, right, a very pro-Russian president, tried to do a very simple pivot towards Europe. We saw what happened. It was immediately clobbered. So the logic is that either you continue remaining an extension of Russia or you establish independence. And we saw that being an extension of Russia proved to be detrimental to our security environment and continue to be perpetuated. Alexander mentioned this, Sossi mentioned this. This is very, very straightforward. So this isn't a pro-West, pro-East posturing. It's about understanding Armenia's ability to formulate a policy that gives us access to capabilities that otherwise we have no access to by virtue of being an extension of Russia. And finally, there was a question about the nature of U.S.-Armenia relations and whether it's organic or transactional. I'll be very quick on this. Transactional relationships are hard to maintain and they're resource intense, whereas organic relations tend to be more sustainable in the long run and they're less resource intense. The scholarly literature supports this conceptualization. And so Armenia in that context is more conducive to being an organic ally to the United States because we do not have any transactional demands, whereas countries like Saudi Arabia, like Azerbaijan, etc., are very resource-intense allies or partners. And so the organic element is defined not only about the democracy component, but the amount of resources the U.S. has to exert to maintain the relationship. So that is the broader configuration.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Nerses. Very insightful comments, of course. Let's move on. Yeghia, any closing remarks from your end?
Thank you, Robert. There were no questions, but just to add a few things. I believe that Armenia, first of all, has to finalize the North-South transport route corridor. And unfortunately, this is the only strategic card that we have for now. If you want to become a geoeconomic player in the region and to have a value to become a player rather than just follow great powers, we have to increase our geoeconomic value and also to have a leverage in the future when it comes to negotiating or on the negotiation tables. And also Armenia still can play a bridging role between India, Iran, the Middle East, Eurasian Economic Union, and also EU. I believe that this is also one of the values of Armenia as a bridging role between different conflicting actors in the region and also to avoid taking sides in a very polarized, let's say, global order. This is one of my remarks.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, let's, Sossi, over to you for quick closing remarks, and then we'll move on to Hago. Go ahead, Sossi.
Thank you. I would like to, I agree with a lot that other fellow experts said, everything that Nerses said, and I will not refer to what others said, but I will switch to the question of Caro because it's extremely important and it's very, very complicated to answer, especially very briefly, but I'll try to do it as brief as possible. So Caro is asking about seceding lands for peace. It's a little bit of misperception, I would say. What is happening now is extremely complicated. Officially, we call it delimitation and demarcation, and those who are opposing it are saying it's not delimitation demarcation because it's done under force, and there is truth in it, of course, because the reason that delimitation demarcation started in Tavush, which was basically the only area where Armenia was controlling Azerbaijani territories, not much, quite small area that are now being handed over. And not in Jermuk was because of the imbalance of power, because it was obvious that if this doesn't happen, Azerbaijan was going to use the argument of previous Soviet Azerbaijani lands still being under Armenian control, start a military offensive for that with this justification. And once it would start it would take much more. It would take so-called ex-Soviet enclaves, which we are still trying to keep and negotiate exchange with Artsakhan. And also maybe also more, because Azerbaijanis are talking about so-called security buffer zone, reminding us about 5+2 regions that Armenia was controlling for 30 years. What is happening is that Azerbaijan has, first of all, normalize the use of force, and it's not just Azerbaijan but other countries too, and there is no international mechanism that can prevent the use of force in the current geopolitical situation. The second, because Azerbaijan is also using cognitive warfare and disinformation and also lawfare, legitimizing its justifications for each military offensive before, during, and after it, as it did for Nagorno-Karabakh Artsakh contest. So in this light, we could lose much more. Now we are also losing because Tavush was basically the area where Armenia had more or less proper defense positions, and now some of them are lost. However, the hope is that there will be international pressure on Azerbaijan, in particular by the US, in a less extent by EU, to continue delimitation and demarcation, to do the same in Jermuk, Sunik, Gerarkunik, Vayodzor, in the areas that Azerbaijan has occupied, which are at least 200 and even more square kilometers. I'm personally quite pessimist because I'm sure that as soon as Azerbaijan gets what it wants, it will immediately demand ex-Soviet enclaves and Zangezur corridor in order to sabotage the rest of the delimitation and demarcation process, which is already favorable for Armenia. However, in the current situation, there didn't seem to be another way for risk management because for sure Azerbaijan was planning an offensive and it had already normalized and legitimized it, proving that those areas were part of Soviet Azerbaijan before the first Artsakh war. This is the short answer, but this is a huge topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sossi, and I want to thank all the briefers, the panelists, of course, and all the participants. We had a great participants. It's obvious, and we had some very good questions. Hopefully, they've all been addressed. If they haven't, please reach out to the panelists. I'm sure they'll be happy to email back with you. And with that, I want to thank everybody again, and Habib, over to you for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Hriar, and thank you to all the panelists, David, Anna, Alexander, Sossi, Yeghia, Nerses, for this excellent presentations and insightful thoughts. And we have a panel discussion in May, on May the 25th, as Hriar mentioned. It will be on the socio-political thinking of Erdogan and Aliyev. And I think it probably will be a very interesting panel discussion again. So you're all invited to attend. And also, if you like this kind of panel discussions and what we do in Armenia as an organization for the ARPA Institute, please donate generously so we can do more, because there's a lot to do in Armenia and Armenia needs our help. Thank you very much. And we'll see you in May, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.